Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Ready to dive into something pretty interesting today?
Always.
All right. So we're looking at this document. It's called Der Kompromiss der Wirtschaftssystem.
Okay.
And right off the bat, kind of mysterious, the author goes by the name Political Ferret.
Interesting.
Yeah, and what they're proposing, it's a compromise between, get this, socialism and capitalism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're gonna unpack that.
That's a big one. Yeah, Political Ferret's making a pretty bold claim right up front. They
Yeah.
say this compromise is like staring us in the face. It's obvious, practical, and yet for some reason it's never been tried.
Right, so that's what we're really going to dig into today, like why not?
Exactly. Let's get into the why not and, of course, what the compromise actually looks like.
Okay, so just to level set here, back to basics.
Yeah, good idea.
When we talk about capitalism, we're talking about free markets, private ownership, you work hard, you get the rewards.
Right, the classic individualistic approach. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have socialism.
Right.
And that's all about collective ownership. It's about making sure resources are distributed fairly so everyone's needs are met.
And Political Ferret really hits on this fundamental tension between the two.
Oh, absolutely.
Capitalism, you can have huge successes,
Right.
but it also can lead to some pretty big inequalities.
For sure. Whereas with socialism, the goal is to create a fairer system, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes that can make it hard to motivate people to, really put in extra effort.
Yeah. So where's the middle ground?
Right, exactly.
And that's where Political Ferret comes in.
Okay, lay it on me.
They're calling it a nested system.
Oh, okay.
Nested system, all right?
Imagine the outer layer, the foundation is capitalism. So you've got, minimal government. They're mainly focused on national security, making sure contracts are enforced.
Okay, I'm following. So basic framework, capitalist. Then what? Now, inside this framework, picture this. You can have socialist communities existing as contracts.
Wait, hold on. So it's like building rooms within a capitalist house?
Exactly. And each room has its own design, right?
Okay. I like that analogy.
So these communities, they'd be communes. They'd voluntarily set their own rules.
So production, distribution, all that raz decided internally.
Yeah. Essentially like mini societies within the bigger capitalist state.
That's wild. So you're saying people could actually choose which system they want to live under?
Yeah, like a marketplace of social contracts. You shop around, you find one that fits your values.
That's a pretty radical idea, isn't it?
It is. And Political Ferret is arguing that, hey, this could actually reduce conflict. People self-select into what they believe in.
Yeah, that makes sense in theory. But it also raises a ton of questions about how it would actually work in practice, right?
Oh, absolutely. Would your hardcore capitalist be cool living next door to a socialist commune?
Right. And how do you deal with trade, resources, all that stuff between these different systems?
So many questions. But before we get to those, let's think about how different groups might react to this whole nested system idea.
All right, good idea. Where should we start?
Well, how about with the capitalists themselves? What do you think? How would they feel about all this?
Well, from what I'm getting from Political Ferret, they seem to think capitalists might be surprisingly open to it.
Really?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, they still get their core principles, right? Property rights, free markets, minimal government intervention. It's all there.
I guess so. Maybe they even see it as a way to, contain socialism. Keep it from spreading.
Yeah, it's like, okay, you want to do your socialist thing? Fine. Just keep it over there in your little commune and don't mess with our free market.
It almost sounds like a libertarian utopia, right? Maximum freedom to live how you want, as long as you're not hurting anyone else.
You're spot on. And Political Ferret actually points out that this whole idea aligns really well with classic libertarian thought.
Okay, so maybe capitalists, libertarians, they're on board.
Maybe.
But what about the socialists? Would they really be okay with just these, mini societies within a system they don't even believe in?
Well, that's where things get a little trickier. Political Ferret thinks that true socialists, like diehards, they'd probably see this as selling out.
Why, though? They get to build their own little utopias, right? Isn't that what they want?
Yeah, but think about it from their perspective. They want a complete overhaul of society, not just these little pockets of socialism.
Okay, yeah. But wouldn't this at least be a step in the right direction? Allow for some experimentation, maybe pave the way for bigger change later?
That's a fair point. But Political Ferret highlights a big potential problem. Who's actually going to join these socialist communities?
People who believe in socialism, right? Those who value equality, sharing, all that.
Sure, in theory. But let's get practical. If you're, let's say, a highly skilled doctor or a super successful entrepreneur, are you really going to choose to live in a system where your hard work and talent might not get fully rewarded?
Good point. Human nature being what it is, most people probably want to see a return on their investment.
Exactly. And that's the dilemma Political Ferret points out. A voluntary socialist system, tucked inside a capitalist one, it might struggle to attract the very people who could make it work best.
Okay, so we've got capitalists maybe intrigued, socialists maybe not so much.
Right.
What about everyone in between, the moderates, those who aren't fully committed to one side or the other? Where do they fit in?
The moderates. They're the wild card here. Political Ferret doesn't really go deep on their perspective, but it's probably safe to assume that they'd be the most open to this whole compromise thing.
Makes sense.
Mhm.
They're not ideologically locked in, so they're probably more willing to experiment, find solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. They might be attracted to the flexibility of the nested system, the ability to choose what aspects of each system work for them.
So we've got a mix of potential reactions here, from excitement to skepticism and everything in between. But I think the biggest question that's still hanging out there is, if this solution is so obvious, so practical,
Yeah.
why hasn't anyone tried it before? I mean, if it could fix so many of the problems we're dealing with, why haven't we seen it in action?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that Political Ferret doesn't give a clear-cut answer to. But they do offer some pretty interesting ideas and theories, and those are exactly what we're going to dig into next.
Okay, well, let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and do just that.
Political Ferret, they suggest maybe the answer is not about the system itself, but more about, like, power, and how people resist change.
Okay, so even if this nested system makes sense on paper, there might be people in power, people who benefit from the way things are now, who'd fight to keep it from happening.
Exactly. Think about it. Any big shift is going to create winners and losers. And the people who are already winning, well, they might not be so eager to change the game.
Makes you wonder,
Yeah.
like, is real progress even possible if the people in charge are happy with the status quo, even if it means others are losing out?
Yeah, it's a pretty deep question. Are those in power really looking out for everyone? Or are they just trying to protect their own position?
It's almost like we're stuck in this, I don't know, social rut. Like, we know there might be a better way, but the current system is just so big and heavy, it's hard to change direction.
That's a great way to put it. And Political Ferret actually brings up another interesting point. Even if you found people who liked the idea of this nested system, there could still be pushback and disagreements.
Wait, really? You mean even among people who are all about compromise, there could be problems?
Yeah, because think about actually putting this into practice. You'd have to figure out how these socialist communities get started, how they're governed, who makes the rules.
Oh, right. Even within socialism, there are different ideas about how things should work.
Mm.
Some people might want a super collective system, others might want a little more individualism. How do you reconcile all that?
Exactly. And then there's the whole question of how these communities interact with the outside world, the capitalist world. Do they isolate themselves completely? Do they trade? What about defense?
It's like, on the one hand, this nested system is all about coexistence, letting different ideologies live together. But on the other hand, it could create a whole new set of conflicts.
It's tricky, right? That's the challenge with any kind of big social change, even if it's well-intentioned. Human societies are messy. Trying to force them into any one structure is bound to create friction and unexpected consequences.
So if it's so complicated, why even bother with this whole nested system idea? Are we just setting ourselves up for more problems?
Well, I wouldn't say that. Remember, we're not trying to find a perfect solution here. This deep dive is more about exploring different possibilities, shaking up our assumptions.
Okay.
Even if this specific proposal never actually happens, just thinking about it forces us to look critically at the systems we have now and maybe imagine something better.
It's kind of like a thought experiment, right? What if we could create a system that gives people more choices, lets them pick the social and economic framework that fits their values?
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by thinking about these big radical ideas, we might come up with some practical insights that could actually help us with the problems we face today.
I like that. So even if this nested system never gets off the ground, just analyzing it, talking about its pros and cons, it's still valuable. Like studying a map of a place you might never visit. It expands your horizons.
I love that analogy, and it really highlights why it's important to engage with ideas that might seem crazy or unrealistic at first. Sometimes those are the ideas that really push us to think differently, to be more creative.
So let's push a little further, even if this stays theoretical.
Hmm.
What if people really could choose their own social and economic system? How would that change things?
Well, it could make society way more dynamic and responsive, right? People could move between systems, try different things out, and find what works best for them.
That sounds amazing, like picking your own adventure, but for society.
Right. It could create a more fluid, flexible world, less stuck in rigid ideologies and more adaptable to change. But of course, there are also potential downsides.
Oh, there's always a catch, isn't there?
Yeah.
So even with all this choice and freedom, there could be problems.
Yeah. For example, think about social fragmentation. If people just cluster with like-minded individuals, you might lose that sense of community and shared purpose.
So instead of a big melting pot, you end up with these isolated pockets of people, each with their own values, not really interacting with each other.
That's a real risk. And then you have to think about how these different communities would relate to each other. Would they cooperate, compete?
It seems like we're back to that same fundamental tension, right? Individual freedom versus collective responsibility. Diversity versus unity.
It's the eternal struggle, isn't it? And there aren't any easy answers. But that's what makes social and political thought so fascinating. It's a constant exploration, trying things out, adapting.
Well, that's a great place to wrap up part 2 of our deep dive, I think. We've looked at the potential benefits of this nested system, the challenges it would face, the big questions it raises about society. But there's still one big mystery we haven't solved.
What's that?
The mystery of political ferret themselves. Who is this person? Why are they so secretive? What's their goal in putting this idea out there?
Those are great questions. And in our final part, we're going to delve into the enigma that is political ferret. We'll try to figure out why they've chosen to stay anonymous and what it all might mean.
It's kind of wild, right?
Yeah.
We spent all this time talking about political ferrets' ideas, but we still know next to nothing about them,
Yeah.
about who they actually are.
It really adds to the whole mystery, doesn't it? Like, why all the secrecy? Why not step into the spotlight, especially with such a, potentially revolutionary idea?
Exactly. You'd think they'd want credit,
Right.
So why the hidden identity? What do you think is going on there?
Well, one possibility is that maybe political ferret is already deeply involved in either the capitalist world or the socialist world, and they're worried about, I don't know, backlash.
Oh, interesting. So they could be afraid of what their own side would think if they came out and supported such a radical compromise.
Right, exactly. Like a double agent trying to build bridges, but they got to stay undercover to do it.
I like that, the double agent of ideology.
Or maybe it's someone who's already in a position of power, and they don't want their personal views to influence things too much.
Ah, so they're putting the idea out there, but keeping a distance. So people judge it on its own merits, not because of who's saying it.
Exactly. They're like, here's a concept, let's discuss it without all the baggage of who I am or what I believe.
That's a pretty interesting approach.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder, do they really believe in this nested system? If they're not willing to stand behind it publicly, maybe they have doubts about whether it could actually work.
It's possible. Maybe they see it more as like a thought experiment to get people talking, to challenge the way we think about these things, rather than a concrete plan they expect to see implemented.
Yeah, maybe they're just planting a seed, hoping someone else will pick it up and run with it.
Could be. And even if that never happens, the fact that someone took the time to think this through, to write it all down, it shows how powerful ideas can be. They can spark debate, make us question things, even if they don't lead to immediate action.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I have to admit I'm both impressed by political ferret and a little frustrated. Impressed by their ideas, their willingness to think differently, but also, frustrated that we don't know who they are. It would be amazing to actually talk to them, to really understand where they're coming from.
I know, right? It would be fascinating to hear their story, what led them to this particular proposal. But hey, maybe there's something to be said for the mystery.
How so?
Well, by staying anonymous, political ferret forces us to focus on the ideas themselves, not on the person behind them.
That's a good point. It's like they're saying, don't get caught up in who I am. Wrestle with the concepts, see where they take you.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important message, especially in today's world. We're so quick to judge, to dismiss ideas based on who's saying them. But what if we just took a step back and really listened? Tried to understand different perspectives, even if we don't agree with them.
That's some good advice right there. And it's something we could all probably do a little more of.
For sure. And who knows, maybe by being more open-minded, more willing to listen, we can start to find solutions to some of the really big problems we're facing. Solutions that might seem crazy or impossible right now, but could actually lead to a better future.
Well said. And on that note, I think we'll wrap things up for today. To all our listeners, keep those minds open, keep exploring new ideas, and keep diving deep. You never know what you might discover.
Absolutely. And remember, the most groundbreaking ideas often come from the most unexpected places. So stay curious, stay engaged, and never underestimate the power of a single thought to make a difference.
That's all for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.